first stepping off the plane, I could have sworn that I knew Spanish. But I got out there and I did not understand a thing. Like, that's something you got to watch out for. Is you realize, oh, I don't actually speak Spanish. I just kind of know Spanish, and in the weeks that follow, you'll pick it up a lot. You'll pick it up very quickly, but that language barrier can be pretty discouraging at first, but it drops out pretty quickly, and you start understanding people. And even as an early missionary, you'll at least be able to understand gospel topics a lot better than you will anything else. So if people are talking about the gospel, you should be more or less fine, even if you're just brand new off the plane. I was really kind of weirded out by a lot of the architecture. A lot of the houses are very differently built. They're all concrete with rebar in them, pretty much. It was not something I was used to. Plus all the bright colors painted on the houses. I was a little weirded out. I thought there was, I don't know. I'm trying to think of how I can explain this. I was a little weirded out, but I was also kind of super excited. It was the first time I'd ever gone abroad, so I really had no idea what to expect. But I guess my first impression of Mexico was I was not really sure what to expect, but it was overall kind of exciting. I was in a new place, experiencing new things, and that for me is a really fun experience, finding a bunch of new things. There's about 200 missionaries. There's not a lot of church history in Guadalajara. It's relatively new in church standards. I think we really started having a missionary presence there about 50 years ago, I want to say. There are a few members who still remember the first chapel being built. So there's about 200 missionaries. About 40% were American, another 50% were Mexican, and the rest were from other Hispanic countries. Actually, there was a large variety. In Guadalajara proper, in Puerto Vallarta, I believe they were both steaks. They had steaks both in both of those places, and I think in Tepic as well there's a steak. But in Santiago and Colima and the other zone in Colima, those are all branches. You got quite a wide experiences. Like, part of my mission, I was in a very subordinate role to the, bishopric and stuff, because that's pretty much what you're doing as a missionary in a well-established ward. You work really hard with the ward mission leader, and they help you out, and the bishop kind of oversees a little bit. But in a branch, it was a very different experience, because you're working directly with the bishop the branch president, because they need all the help they can get. They need more members. They need direct input from the missionaries, because missionaries have a lot of experience with church callings and meeting different people and different members. That doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to know more than them. It's just you provide a different perspective that they might need. And so that's a really interesting experience, being able to help out in a branch and help the church grow from very small roots. There's the Guadalajara Mexico temple. They only have the one temple, and I think we kind of share it with the other mission. So the boundaries we ended up with were Nayarit, which is the state just north of Jalisco, which is where Guadalajara, the city, is at. We have pretty much all of Nayarit. We have Puerto Vallarta. We have Guadalajara, the city, about half of the city of Guadalajara. We have, I can't remember all the zones, but we have Zapopan. I think we lost Tlaquepaque, but we gained something else. I'll get to that in a second. I can't remember all the zones. There's a Centro. But anyway, so yeah, we have half of Guadalajara, the city. And then to the south, we have Colima. And we have two cities in Colima. We have Manzanillo, and I never served in the other city, so I can't remember it off the top of my head. But if it comes up, I'll mention it again. A lot of it's coastal area. So you basically have kind of three areas in Guadalajara. You have either coastal area, you have desert area, which is what you have in the north. Like if you're in Nayarit and if you're in the Santiago mission, not Santiago, zone, and not Tepic. Those are the two zones in Nayarit. Tepic is definitely a city zone. Santiago is very much more of a desert zone. And so you run into a lot more just not really desert like sand. That's a bad impression. It's just kind of dry, lots of shrubs, not super fertile, but not infertile completely. So you can get a lot of fruits and stuff growing there because there's plenty of rain and stuff, but there's not a lot of just what you'd imagine as normal ground. I think that's the big... Okay, sorry, going back a little bit. That was the big thing I noticed. The grass was different in Mexico. It was super... I didn't realize we have like a standardized Kentucky bluegrass thing going on here in the U.S. And just seeing all the different like plants and grass and that kind of shocked me a little bit, seeing how weird that was. There's 3 states. We primarily are in Jalisco, but there's a state to the north called Nayarit, and there's a state to the south called Colima. And those are the 3 states that we are in. We're kind of like, where Mexico bends? That's kind of where we're on the west coast, kind of around there, starting where Mexico kind of starts bending a little bit. So I think one of the big things about Mexican culture that I really like is they're very family oriented. Like, even in so in the church, we're very close in our families. We believe they're an eternal unit. But, I've seen families that pretty much just live in the same house, or at least right next to each other. Like the aunts and the uncles are all really good friends. The cousins are all great friends. It gets a little out of control sometimes just because there's tons of people living there, but it's just really cool to see how close families are and how much they really place an emphasis on the family. The Mexican culture really is a really family-oriented culture, and I really like that. Another thing that I absolutely love is people will just say good morning to you or good evening. Like, you're walking down the street, you do not know this person at all, and they'll say, buenos dias, because it's morning, and because they're walking by you. It doesn't matter that they don't know you. It's very just friendly and open, and it really just projects this very open, very open culture that they're willing to talk to you and acknowledge your existence and wish you a good morning. It's I know it's a little thing, but that just doesn't happen here at all. Like, if I was walking down the street and I said good morning to people, they'd kind of give me a weird look. And for me, that was a really cool thing, that they were just so friendly. And I think that's the big thing. People in the Mexican culture are generally very friendly. There's some people who aren't very friendly towards missionaries because of who we are, and that's okay. And I understand that they are either scared of us or don't understand us, and that's okay. That's what we're there for. We're there to try to help correct misconceptions and share the gospel. But for the most part, even if people aren't always willing to follow through on commitments or do anything with the message you've given them, they're at least a lot of times willing to listen to you and give you a chance to share something with them. And that's a really nice thing I like about their culture. Guadalajara itself it's a huge city. It's enormously large because it just kind of spread out. And the primary means of transportation, you have two means of transportation on your mission. You are going to walk somewhere, and if it's too far to walk somewhere, you are going to take the bus. And the first time you get on the bus, it's going to be the scariest thing you've ever done. Because sometimes the Mexican bus drivers are just trying to make their route and trying to pick up as many people as possible. And it gets a little bit scary sometimes. This one time I was in a bus and we pressed the button to get off the bus, because they stop at predetermined locations a lot of times, but they'll stop pretty much anywhere when you press the button to get off. And he stopped the bus, and this guy just came right underneath the bus and hit him. Like, the bus was on top of the car, and we were in the back seat too. So it was kind of freaky. But other than that, they drive really fast and you're going to get freaked out, but eventually you'll be like, whatever, this is just a bus ride. Weather, it's primarily dry. There's a rainy season, Usually somewhere in between May and July, somewhere in there. It's probably over by July, usually. You might need an umbrella for 2 months out of the year. But other than that, it's usually clear. It's not too dry, especially on the coastal areas. But the people there, there's all kinds of work there. But you find a lot more small businesses, a lot of food carts, a lot of cobblers, a lot of woodworkers, a lot of leather workers. Guadalajara in particular has a really nice central market that you can go to. And they also have these little things like that. Usually they're on like Thursdays or Sundays, sometimes Saturdays. They're called tianguis. They're these little like yard sales, but like for a whole street. And so people show up and they do a tianguis there and they sell stuff. It's a good way to find some interesting stuff that you haven't seen before, and a good way to do some street contacting. The housing situation. So something you are going to have to live without, at least figure out. You might have to live without, because sometimes your hot water heater isn't going to work. That's just kind of a fact of life. You will have to live without hot water and hot showers. And sometimes it's spotty, sometimes they work. It just depends on where you're living specifically. But the houses are, like I said before, concrete with rebar in them. They're pretty sturdy. They're very square. And if you're in Guadalajara proper, you're definitely going to have your house is going to be touching other houses. So you walk out of your house and you'll have neighbors on either side of you who live right next door, literally. So crime safety, the reason I kept not mentioning anything about crime safety is because they're really, unless you're in Santiago, and even then that's super rare because most of the crime is focused in Michoacan, which is the state above Nayarit. There's not a lot of crime or problems like that. I don't think I've ever heard of a missionary getting mugged before. There is okay. Basically, the way it works in the Guadalajara mission, there are drug dealers, there are bad people there, but they don't mess with missionaries. And the main reason for that is, one, we're really not there. We're really not we're kind of newsworthy, so they kind of don't want to really get involved with that. And two, people that tend to get hurt, and it's a sad thing, people that tend to get hurt by these bad people are usually they're people that buy drugs or buy things from them or are in the organizations already and are either being made an example of or something like that. And so pretty much it's kind of a we don't mess with you, you don't mess with us sort of relationship. So no one really bothers the missionaries, and the missionaries really don't bother the crime element that exists. It's not a big one, but it's pretty much just a mutual, we're not going to mess with each other sort of thing, because there'd be no point. Zapopan, which is one of the suburbs of Guadalajara, actually has its own virgin. The main virgin that Mexico usually has is the Virgin of Guadalupe, but in Zapopan there's they have the La Virgen de Zapopan, and it's kind of unclear doctrinally exactly what's going on there, but the basic is people in Zapopan really like the Virgin of Zapopan. Or I don't remember. I don't think she's actually called the Virgin of Zapopan. She's called something else, but it's Zapopan's big thing. And so that's something you have to be aware of in there. People will like to bring that up a lot. And usually a good response is just, we believe that Mary was the mother of Jesus and that she was an amazing woman who gave birth to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And that satisfies most people. So one of my favorite things about Guadalajara, this is probably one of my biggest things that I absolutely loved when I came down there. The food. Guadalajara has some amazing food. The one dish you have to try is called a torta ahogada. It basically means drowned sandwich. They take this bread called torta, and they add some pork usually into it. They dump a bunch of red sauce all over the sandwich to kind of loosen it up, because this bread's really dry. And then you basically eat your drowned sandwich. It's pretty good. Also, street tacos are amazing. With vendor food, you got to be careful. Just basically follow some basic rules of safety. if they're selling things that look way too cheap to be they're way too cheap to be realistic, they're probably not using good meat. Is a good rule. So it's usually a little bit better to go somewhere that's cheap, but not like way too cheap, if that makes sense. They have they have tons of food stands. So there's like a never-ending, I guess, buffet of foods you can try. There's tons of great things you can eat. You have to visit the Centro Mercado, the central market, at least once. It's kind of, they got tons of things there. They're selling. It's basically like a giant tianguis that's always there. They have food. They have belts, wallets. I still want to go back someday and get a traje de charro, which is basically a mariachi suit. Oh, that's right. I forgot. Guadalajara is the birthplace of mariachi. So you're going to hear a lot of mariachi music. Just keep that in mind. I lived in Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara. Puerto Vallarta was interesting. It was... So my area in Puerto Vallarta specifically had all the touristy stuff in it. I did not spend a lot of time in the main part of my area because there was a bunch of touristy stuff. We had some outlying villages that we visited a lot, and more inland, there was more people who we could actually, preach and teach to. I'm not saying you can't teach to tourists, but it's not a very profitable venture for missionaries to go preaching to tourists. They're on vacation. They're only going to be there a couple days, and you kind of look out of place in a shirt and tie, and you don't want to give the appearance of a tourist. But it was a really cool experience living just in a nice city. You had plenty of little shops all around, and plenty of people to talk to. Like cities in Puerto Vallarta, the city of Puerto Vallarta actually had more upward progression, like a lot more like stacked buildings, like apartment complexes and that sort of thing. So Mexican Spanish is, well, I hate to say this, is one of the more looked down upon Spanish by other Spanish-speaking cultures. And that's because a lot of American words come down and kind of mix their way into the language. That being said, there are some words that are specifically unique to Mexico, and the slang, you have to be careful with the slang. Because some of the slang that people use in the street is perfectly okay, and some of the slang is not okay to use. And so you just gotta keep an eye out and know what things are okay to say. As a general rule, I wouldn't really use slang until you understood exactly what the word meant. Although a really good word for in Mexican Spanish is mande. Mande is basically huh. It means they're basically saying, "What did you just say? I didn't quite catch that." So it's a really good way to help someone say, Mande is like what, and they'll usually just repeat what they said. I have found that's probably the most useful Mexican slang word I have ever learned. South American Spanish is pretty different from Mexican Spanish. South American Spanish tends to have, from what I understand, more of they have an entire other verb tense they use, but that's not the point. It's a lot more proper. Mexican Spanish is usually a lot faster. Not nearly as fast as, say, Puerto Rican Spanish or Dominican Spanish, but it's a little bit faster, so it's a little bit harder to keep up. And people will notice that they'll peg you instantly as having served in Mexico when you speak Spanish, because your Spanish will come out a little bit faster. Sometimes it's a little more nasally, depending on the region. So there's kind of like a general Mexican Spanish accent, which is just pretty normal. The one most people are familiar with, actually, is the Northern Mexico accent. That one's very nasally. They pronounce their CH as more like an SH. They don't say Chihuahua. They say Chihuahua with a sh instead of a ch. In El DF, El Distrito Federal, they sing with a very sing-songy voice. In Spanish, it's cantadito. They say things like, "Oye, jefe, ¿cómo estás?" That's very up and down, modulating voice. As for the other regions, I'm not that familiar. Those are usually the most easy. Those are the easiest ones to pick out, though. Is a DF accent and a Northern accent. I mean, I don't know. There's not a whole lot to say about Mexican Spanish. It's just a little bit faster and a little bit more informal than other kinds of Spanish. I mean, Spain Spanish. Don't even try comparing the two. It's just a nightmare. Real quick, the most exotic food I ever had was a fruit called yaca. I'm not sure how it's spelled, but it's basically this giant green fruit that's like a shell that's kind of spiky. You open it up, and it's orange and slimy, and you have to basically rip out these little parts of the inside that are edible. And I've been told that it has like 7 different flavors. I've only tasted like 2 or 3, but that's probably the most exotic food I've had. The weirdest one I'd ever had was chicken foot soup. Chicken feet is not actually that disgusting. It's just a little flavorless is all. So it was kind of weird. I was like, oh, this is a soup with a chicken foot in it. That's new. So that would be the weirdest one. It wasn't bad, though. So the craziest experience I ever had was when we were on splits with the zone leaders, and we were doing some tracting, and we ran into this nice lady who we shared a message with, and then she told us that she had just had a vision in the middle of the lesson, or in the middle of the prayer, and she was talking, and she was clearly a little off in the head, and she basically was telling us that she saw an aura around us and was basically trying to tell us, like I think my companion had a purple aura and I had a white aura. I'm not sure what that meant, but that it was kind of a weird thing, and that was kind of my favorite crazy experience. I think the times I felt the spirit strongest was when I was sharing the gospel with someone who was receptive. Just having someone who was actually listening, actually wanting to learn. That was such a huge boon to the spirit, because it's one thing, because as missionary you do bring the spirit with you, but if they're actually willing to listen and learn, they'll really get the spirit with them, and especially I'd say with things like the plan of salvation and eternal families, that's really where I think I felt the spirit the most. I didn't do this personally. It was a sister who did this. You never use the word embarazado because it's a false cognate. It sounds like embarrassed. It means pregnant. So apparently a sister missionary over the pulpit said that she was very embarazado, that the bishop had basically the way she said it, she was implying that she was pregnant because of the bishop. What she meant to say is she was very avergonzado. She was very not ashamed, but kind of scared and not really sure, embarrassed. She was very embarrassed to be on the stand because she wasn't really ready. She didn't think she was really ready to talk, and so that language mistake had to get explained to the congregation afterwards. So that was fun. I think it was just to learn how to care about people. Just see the individual for who they are and see them as a child of God and the potential they have to be. Learning how to talk to people, how to relate to people, how to live with people, in the case with companions. So this only happened one time, but it was during the rainy season, and my companion and I, we had an appointment with a girl who was going to get baptized, and we didn't want to miss that appointment. So we left the house. It was super rainy, and the street we had to walk up to get to her house was completely flooded. And not just like flooded like, oh, there's standing water. It was like a river was flowing down this street. And we were like, we have to get to see her today. We can't miss this appointment. So my companion and I, we both took off our shoes and socks, rolled up our pants, and like just trudged up the river. And it was raining the entire time too, so that was fun. Probably went up to about here on my leg, like almost a foot or two, like almost to my knee. So I'm a tall guy. I'm 6'2". So for a whole year, I didn't actually get any baptisms, and that's pretty unusual for Mexico, and that was really hard for me. I didn't know why. And it wasn't until about a year into my mission that I actually got my first baptism. And so I think the hardest thing for me was just remembering that the Lord needed me there. Even if I wasn't necessarily seeing the fruits of my success, he at least needed me there to plant the seed and help those out there who needed to hear what I had to say. Love the people. They need your help, and they're an amazing people. 2, the sisters are going to give you seconds. This is non-negotiable. Your companion might be able to help you out a little bit, but you're gonna, if you, in a lot of cases, if you don't get seconds, the sisters may become offended. So just remember that. And 3, always try to love your companion. Sometimes, and I'm not saying they'd be a bad missionary, just sometimes people, choque cabezas, bump heads, and that's just a result of personalities. Just remember that they're out there too. They want to serve the Lord, and they want to share the gospel as much as you do. So just try to love your companion. Don't worry, you'll lose your Mexican accent. And you'll adjust. Life kind of has a way of adjusting itself. Don't ever lose that scripture study habit. Always remember to study your scriptures. Never lose that. That's an amazing habit to keep. Sometimes it's going to get hard, and you're not going to have a lot of confidence in yourself. And I want to let you know right now that that's not an attitude you should have. The Lord called you specifically to this mission. He called you to Guadalajara. He trusts you there. He wants you there. That's something that you should always remember. Your first night in the MTC is going to feel like, oh my goodness, what have I gotten myself into? You are going to be a little scared, but don't worry, that'll pass. Always remember that the Lord's the one who's in charge. He's gonna guide you, and he's gonna let you know what you need to say when you need to say it. But by that token, you need to make sure that you've studied and that you have the Spirit with you. Another really big thing: love the people, love Mexico, love your companion. If you have that love, people will feel it, and they'll know that you care. There's a lot of work to still do in Mexico. There's tons of people who, especially in Guadalajara, there's tons of people whose lives I've seen changed amazingly, turned 180 degrees because, we were able to share this message with them. And it wasn't me that did it. It was the Lord and the person and the convert I shared it with. I was just the intermediary. And the Lord will bless these people, and it's such an amazing experience to be a part of that. So just always remember to keep the Lord at the forefront of your mind, and he'll take care of the rest. Any problems you have back at home or any worries you have, the Lord will take care of, and he'll help you out. He'll teach you some amazing things on the mission that you won't even realize you needed to learn. I know that serving a mission is an amazing experience, and that it's truly what Heavenly Father wants us to do. I know that every one of us has the potential to become a great missionary through the help of the Lord. And I say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.